They were friendly, almost too friendly, inviting me to meet them later that night, at a cemetery of all places. My first instinct was to say no, but then again, what harm could come from hanging out with two kids from school? I had no idea that as darkness fell, I'd be walking right into a nightmare. A haunting encounter that would send chills down my spine and make me question who I could really trust. And it all started that first day, sitting with the twins in that crowded cafeteria. I was a new student at Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania, starting my junior year. Not knowing anyone was really tough. By then, everyone already had their friend groups sorted out. The worst part was lunchtime. My school wouldn't let juniors leave for lunch, only seniors. So I had to eat in the cafeteria. I dreaded it because I knew I'd have no one to sit with, and I didn't want to force myself into a random table. When lunchtime finally came, I walked into the cafeteria with my tray of food, looking for a place to sit. Every single table was taken, so I didn't even have the option of sitting alone. But there was one table in the corner of the cafeteria with only two kids sitting there. It seemed like the least intimidating spot to sit. So, I walked over and asked if I could sit there. They both looked at each other, and one of them said, "Yeah." When I sat down, I noticed the two were identical twins. They looked like they were partially of Hispanic heritage, but they didn't have accents. Honestly, they seemed all right. They introduced themselves as Finn and Henry and started a conversation with me. They invited me to hang out after school, and I figured, why not? I had to start somewhere when it came to making friends. I got their numbers, and after school, I went home to drop off my stuff. Shortly after, I got a text from Henry telling me that he and his brother were planning to hang out. He asked me to meet them around 9 o'clock that night at the nearby cemetery, which was about a 10-minute walk from my house. He said there was a cool hangout spot near there. Since the first day of school was a Friday, we had the next day off, and I had nothing else to do, so I agreed. When the time came, Henry texted me again, asking if I was still coming. I said, "Yeah, I'm leaving in a few," and confirmed we were meeting on the road by the cemetery. He said, "Yeah," so I began my walk in the dark towards the cemetery. The longer I walked, the more I thought about my new situation. Being the new kid in high school and the odd fact that I was literally walking to a cemetery at night to hang out with two kids I had just met. Anyway, I got to the little road next to the cemetery and asked Henry where they were. He started typing right away and said they were in the woods, hanging out by a small lake that they wanted to show me. He then promptly sent his location. So I made my way into the woods, pushing branches out of my way and using my tiny phone flashlight as my only source of light. I started calling for Henry and Finn as I felt like I was close enough according to the location he sent me. To the location he sent me, at least. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, so I stopped. They were definitely footsteps, slowly and quietly approaching me. I called out, warning them that they'd better not be trying to scare me. But there was no answer. I decided this was ridiculous, so I turned around and started walking back toward the road. Then, those footsteps, the ones I mentioned earlier, changed from quiet and slow to fast and heavy. Before I could react, someone had their nails digging into my neck, effectively choking me. I heard a familiar voice scream, "Grab him! Grab him!" I managed to break free from the chokehold and sprinted towards the road. I know they followed me until the tree line near the road, but I was faster than them and could run for miles. And that's exactly what I did. I ran straight home. When I got home, I told my parents everything. They considered calling the police, but we thought it would be better to take pictures of the nail marks on my neck and report the incident to the school the next day. That's exactly what we did. And with the help of the texts I received from Henry, we were able to get the two students expelled. My parents made me block both of their numbers, and I didn't argue with that. They also wanted to make sure that the kids didn't know where we lived. I assured them they didn't, at least as far as I knew. A week later, one night, I woke up feeling extremely cold. I heard the sound of wind blowing into my room, and when I looked over, I saw that my window was completely open. I wondered if my mom had come in and opened it, but that didn't make any sense. It was around 50 degrees outside. I walked over to the window and looked down. A few feet below my bedroom window, there was a part of the house's exterior that jutted out, creating a small ledge. My father had always told me to jump onto it in case of a fire. I quickly shut the window and walked over to my parents' bedroom, gently knocking and then opening the door. I woke my mom up and asked if she had opened my window. She sat up and said, "No, why?" I repeated the question, more concerned now, explaining that my window had been opened all the way by someone. She immediately shook my dad to wake him up and told him to go check my room with me. But when he woke up, he just told me to grow up and go back to sleep. Leaving my parents' door open, I walked back down the hall to my room. That's when I noticed something unusual. My door, which I had left completely open, now seemed to be half shut. Slowly, I pushed the door open just a little to peek through the crack, wondering if someone might be hiding behind it. Even though the thought crossed my mind, I never could have actually expected to see what I saw. Thought there was someone hiding behind my door. I screamed for my dad, shrieking loudly enough to be heard 3 doors down. Suddenly, the door slammed shut just as my dad came rushing out of his room towards me. I yelled, "There's someone in my room," so he barged in and quickly turned on the light. At that moment, we both saw it, the leg of a person jumping out of my window. My dad sprinted to the window, then downstairs and out the front door in an attempt to chase them down. However, he came back a few minutes later, out of breath, saying he didn't see anyone. Full of energy and fear, I knew in my gut that it had to be the twins I got expelled. My dad called the police, and when they arrived, I had to explain everything, including the incident in the woods. My father backed up my story, but without any concrete proof of who entered my room, the police said there wasn't much they could do. They advised us to lock all doors and consider installing outdoor cameras. For the next few solid months, I slept in constant fear, but thankfully, nothing like this ever happened again. Looking back now, I can't help but wonder why I was so willing to meet those kids in the woods at night. I should have known better when I first saw them in the cafeteria, that they were trouble, and I should have stayed far away. Freshman year story, 2007. It was freshman year of high school in 2007, during the last period gym class. We had a substitute teacher that day, a stormy, gloomy day. He was an older man, not quite a senior citizen, but with gray hair, probably around 55 to 60 years old. As he took attendance, he gave me a double take, which made me uncomfortable. Not to sound vain, but I'd always been aware that I looked more mature than most freshmen. The substitute told us to split up into our volleyball teams and then disappeared into the hall by the locker rooms for a while. 40 minutes went by, the period ended, and it was time for us to get changed and go home. When I went to open my locker, it wouldn't budge. I tried my usual combination over and over, but it just wouldn't click open. Frustrated, I went to find the substitute teacher to ask for my combination again, thinking maybe it just slipped my mind. When I told him about the situation, he asked me to wait a few minutes while he retrieved the list of locker combinations. I waited outside the office, and eventually, he came out with a book in his hands, open to a specific page. To my surprise, he walked with me into the girls' locker room. By then, the locker room was almost empty, with just one girl finishing up changing. He walked over to my locker. He tried the combination written on the paper, but it didn't work, no matter how many times he tried. Each time he failed, he would look at me and laugh. I forced myself to laugh along just to be polite, but it started feeling weird when he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll figure this out." He tried the combination again, his hand still on my shoulder, and once more, it didn't work. I felt his hand slowly inch down from my shoulder to my lower back. I quickly pushed away and grabbed my bag, saying, "It's okay. I'm late for my bus." Then, as if it was some kind of miracle, he tried the combination one more time, and the locker opened. He gave a smile and walked away. I waited until I heard the locker room door shut before getting changed quickly. But then, suddenly, the room went dark. I hurriedly finished pulling up my pants and shoved my stuff into the locker in the pitch black. Throwing my backpack on, I started walking to the back exit of the locker room, which led outside. The thought of the substitute waiting by the door terrified me. Everything about him gave off predatory vibes. When I got to the end of the aisle of lockers, I reached an intersection of 2 rows. To get to the exit, I needed to turn left, but instinctively, I glanced to the right to make sure it was clear. There was just enough light seeping in from a single rectangular window high up on the wall for me to see him peeking around the wall of lockers. I bolted for the exit door, hearing him behind me shouting, "Wait, wait, it's not what it looks like." I dashed outside into the pouring rain, off the school campus, and walked the rest of the way home, soaking wet but relieved to be away. On the walk home, I started to reflect on what had happened. It occurred to me that he had most likely changed my locker combination as a way to get me alone in the locker room. And as for what he might have been planning when he cut the lights, I never wanted to imagine. Honestly, I was too emotionally shaken and embarrassed to tell anyone about it. Not my parents, not my friends. It was something I kept to myself all these years because, truthfully, I never felt comfortable sharing it. Band class incident. Back in high school, I was in the band, which was basically an easy A. It was either that or orchestra or chorus, so I chose band. Our band teacher, Mr. Nicholson, had a grading system where as long as you attended class and showed up for your weekly lessons, you got an A. Unfortunately, towards the end of one quarter, I had missed 2 lessons, and as a result, my grade dropped to a B. I went to him after class to ask if I could make up the missed lessons. Though he seemed reluctant, he said he'd allow me to come in during a lunch period to practice in one of the downstairs storage rooms to earn credit for a lesson. I was more than happy with that arrangement, knowing I'd probably just play games on my phone instead of actually practicing. The next day, during my lunch period, I arrived at the music room, grabbed my saxophone, and headed down the stairs outside the music room toward the basement area for the music department. The basement was always a bit creepy because absolutely no one except for the music teachers usually went down there, and the lights were pretty unreliable. I had only been down there a couple of times before, but on that day, I walked down the hallway, and on either side were a series of small rooms, maybe 7 by 7 feet each. All these rooms were used to store things like chairs, music stands, spare instruments, Christmas decorations, and so on. I stepped into one of the rooms and shut the door behind me. I set up my music on one of the stands just in case Mr. Nicholson came down to check on me, but in reality, I didn't plan on playing at all. I started playing games on my phone, enjoying the peace and quiet. Then, all of a sudden, darkness, like pitch black. The lights went out completely, leaving only the glow of my phone screen. Instinctively, I looked over to the light switch in the room and flicked it up and down a few times, but it did nothing. I stumbled as I got up from my seat to open the door, only to be met with more darkness in the hallway. Holding my phone out in front of me to illuminate the hallway, I could just barely see anything. It was an old iPhone 3, and those didn't have flashlights. But the little bit of light it provided was enough to see that one of the doors near the end of the hall was open. Then, I heard something being dragged in that room, like one of those big plastic containers, and soon after, I heard manic breathing followed by animal-like grunting. My heart raced as I saw a large plastic container being pushed out of the room and into the hallway. At that moment, I turned off my phone screen and quickly slipped back into the room I was just in, shutting the door as quietly as I could. I didn't know exactly what I was thinking, but hearing those strange sounds combined with the sudden blackout made me uneasy and suspicious. Whoever that person was, they were blocking the way to the stairs. Of course, I had no cell reception down in that small basement area, so calling for help wasn't an option. All I felt comfortable doing was sitting silently in the room, hoping that the lights would eventually come back on. But as the minutes ticked by, it seemed like they never would. Realizing that I couldn't just sit there forever, I decided to make a move. I quietly opened the door with my phone held out in front of me for light. I stepped cautiously into the hall, inching closer to the stairs. Suddenly, I heard a noise again. Panicking, I quickly crept into the nearest open room and shut the door behind me. At that point, I still had no idea what or who I was hiding from. Could it have been a staff member or a janitor? The only reason I thought it might not be was because they only appeared after the lights went out. Standing there in complete darkness, I listened closely, waiting for another sound from outside. But you know how sometimes you can just sense someone's presence in a room, even without hearing them? That feeling suddenly overcame me in the pitch-black silence. My hand was shaking as I lifted my phone and pressed the home button, turning on the screen for just half a second. That brief moment of light was enough to reveal a figure. Someone standing in the corner of the storage room, only 3 feet away from me. My breath caught, and I tried to act like I hadn't seen anything, but it was already too late. The silence broke with a sound, and then a hand reached out, patting my shoulder twice before squeezing it tightly. I panicked. Desperately, I fumbled for the doorknob, struggling to find it in my terror. When I finally grabbed hold of it and managed to pull the door open, the man inside tried to force it shut again, but I was already out. I bolted up the stairs and out the door to the main level of the music hall, where the lights were still on, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran straight to Mr. Nicholson, breathless, and quickly explained what had happened. He immediately called security to check the basement area. When they returned, they said the basement was empty. No one was there, but a bunch of music equipment had been moved around. The rest of the period, Mr. Nicholson canceled his flute lesson, and I sat in the room with him and 5 flute players, explaining the entire story in detail. Without any cameras in the music hall, there was no way to catch whoever had gone down there and cut the power to the basement. It seemed they were trying to steal expensive music equipment, or worse. The next day, I was called into the dean's office to recount my story, and the rest is history. A nighttime break-in plan. One night, my friends and I came up with what we thought was a genius plan: to sneak into the high school basement through one of the windows that was broken and never fixed. The catch was that the window was accessible only by hopping a short metal gate surrounding the staircase leading down to the basement. While the gate wasn't exactly an effective deterrent, it added just enough of a barrier to make us feel like we were really doing something devious as soon as you crossed over it. We made sure there weren't any security cars around and hopped the gate. Crawling through the window was tricky since we had to boost each other up and squeeze through a ridiculously narrow opening. But once we were in, we were in. We split up to explore different parts of the basement, but it quickly became clear that the place was a mess and far from interesting. There was hardly any light. Only one dim bulb in a far corner, and the glowing exit signs produced more light than you'd expect. I was wandering around when I saw one of my friends in front of me. He whispered, "Let's go upstairs," so I followed him to the stairs. He opened the door to the main hallway of the school, where everything was completely dark. I always assumed some lights would be left on at night, but not a single one was. All that stood out were the red glow of exit signs as far as I could see. As we walked down the hallway, I whispered, "Dude, this is really creepy," and he responded, but it didn't quite register at the time. Who knew if someone else might be in the building besides us? Little did I know how right that thought would be. We went into a bathroom, and my friend entered one of the stalls. I whispered for him to hurry up, but he took his time. Then, my phone started to ring. I picked up, and it was my friend Chris asking, "Where the hell did you go?" I replied, "I'm upstairs with either Roland or Brandon." Chris then said, "What do you mean?" "They're with me." Right after, both Brandon and Roland shouted, "Hi," through his speakerphone. I froze, my mind trying to process what was happening. And then I heard laughing, coming from the stall. It wasn't a laugh I recognized. I looked up at the stall, and to my horror, someone was peeking over it, standing on the toilet to look down at me. I screamed, "Holy!" repeatedly into the phone as I bolted out of the bathroom. Just as I got out, I heard the stall door slam shut behind me. Panicking, I tried to find my way back to the basement entrance in the dark. It wasn't easy, but I eventually found it and started shouting my friends' names as I ran down the stairs. I yelled, "Go, go, go," when they answered, and we all frantically scrambled to escape. We took turns boosting each other up onto a bucket and then out through the window, and I was the first one out, terrified that whoever was in the bathroom might be following us. Once we were all outside, I explained what happened, gasping for breath while also laughing, feeling safe now that I was with everyone. But our relief was short-lived. As we looked back at the school building, checking all the classroom windows, we saw someone standing in one of the downstairs windows, their hands pressed against the glass. Only half of their face was visible. I muttered, "That's got to be him," and Roland quickly urged us to get out of there. We ran until we were completely off the premises. Afterward, we came up with a lot of possible explanations, but none of them really made sense. And needless to say, we never did anything like that again. As I look back, that night still gives me chills. What started as a silly adventure with friends ended with a terrifying encounter that none of us will ever forget. We never found out who that person in the basement was or what they were doing there, and I'm not sure we ever want to know. One thing is for sure, sometimes the scariest things happen when you're least expecting it, and one wrong move can lead you to places you never should have gone. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more spine-tingling tales like this one. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more thrilling adventures.